Who hasn't been to a QASIG before? Oh, lots of newcomers. All right, welcome all the newcomers. We've been doing this for 15 years. Like that, that's about right. So I was trying to have a thought-provoking presenter to give you some ideas to think about. And tonight we have Roy McMillion. And he will be speaking about quality assurance as it relates to risk management. Come on up. All right.
You're a lovely crowd. So first thing I'm going to do is kind of gauge the room. How many of you are working on distributed applications? Right? How many of you have those distributed applications hosted in the cloud? Oh, yes. How many of you are working with sensitive or protected data? Yeah. Everybody knows the difference between sensitive data and protected data? No. No. Sensitive data is stuff that I may not want you to know about. Protected data is data that I am required to keep secret by the United States government. So Facebook is sensitive data. Unless you're using Facebook Pay, then it's protected data. Right? So everything you do on Facebook is only sensitive. It's not protected unless you pay somebody using Facebook's app, and then it becomes protected. Typically, we think of 3 buckets. Who you are, what your health is, and then what your finances are. The 3 major buckets of protected data. PII, PHI, and money. So I am Roy McMillion. I started my test career at Microsoft doing the fun stuff. I was in the games group. I started on Flight Simulator. If you're ever wondering if there's a pilot in the war room, just wait a few minutes. He'll tell you. I am a pilot. That's how I started my test career. I later went on to Quardev, spent many years at Quardev, and then went to my current place of work, Delta Dental of Washington. We are the world, or not the world, the Washington's largest dental insurance provider and Washington's oldest dental insurance provider. Some of the key things that I did at Dental was drive the automation program, institute risk-driven testing, which is kind of what led me into the risk management team, which is my current assignment, in addition to having oversight to the quality assurance group. Security and quality. Anymore, these 2 things are not different. It used to be that you could say that your security guys were over here and you did your functional testing. You made sure that your quality was good and the security group did it or whatever they wanted. Anymore, this is not true. The security of people's data is not only in real terms part of quality, but in the perception of your customers. Quality is the security of their data. Both security and quality exist to serve the needs of the business, and you don't get one without the other anymore. Now into the scary bit of my presentation. Data breaches cost companies millions of dollars. This is a report done by Verizon, these are just the reported breaches. There were 53,000 incidents reported in 2018. 2,216 of them were confirmed data breaches, which means individual incidents of data leaving somebody else's door. Where do those come from? 73% from outside the company going in, 28% inside the company going out. the attacks, the my glasses, hacking, going through known vulnerabilities is still the bulk of everything. But what we see increasingly is malware, and we see our good old-fashioned social engineering. Hi, this is Bob, the county password inspector.
Oh, my parents would fall for that one.
So I'll make this report available to everybody. It's very interesting to look at this. Verizon does this and gives it out for free every year. And I like to point out that these are just reported incidences. These are only incidents that have been reported to the Common Reporting Framework. When we talk about the effects of a data breach, the number I like to put out is $215. $215 per belly button. If you breach 1 million customer data, the potential fine from the US government is $215 per belly button. And that's just the fine. So to say that security isn't a part of quality is really putting your organization at risk and doing your organization a disservice. How systems work matter. For us old school push button testers, we have a test case, we test the data we put into it, we make sure that the data that comes out of it is what we expect. Unsecured cloud database exposes personal information for half of American households. If you're just doing push button testing, data in, data validation, that works fine, right? If you request data from your system and the data comes back to you in the format and the content you want, as a tester, should you care about how that data is stored? My argument is yes. You should absolutely care about how it happens, not just that it happens correctly. The way that happened is 2 security researchers did a port scan, just a port scan on Microsoft Azure, and they found an unsecured database for a major hotel system containing names, addresses, expected annual incomes for 80 million people. And all they did was a port scan. Second one here, Equifax. I'm sure everybody heard about Equifax. Probably most of your data was breached by Equifax. That was a failure to patch one Apache server. Right? Think about your infrastructure. Think about the way data is moving through your systems. Right? Part of my role as risk management is to make sure that all our systems are patched. And when we do that, we say, prove it. That's what a tester does, is we ask the systems to prove it does what they're saying it does. So this is a natural, in my view, just quite a natural segue for any tester. Testers ask questions. It's what they're really good at, right? When we talk about security, and when we talk about how security gets measured, there are a lot of potential frameworks. I put a bunch of them on there. ISO 2702, the 2005 version, the 2013 version. The 2005 version didn't have anything about wireless. Right? 2013 adds that. The NIST 853 revision 4 is a security framework. The CSC Top 20, NIST CSF, CSF is critical security framework. High Trust, SOC 2, and PCI. These are all different frameworks that you can utilize to measure your security. We say controls in the parlance, so each one of these feature a different level or a different number of controls. 257 controls for the NIST 853, which is probably one of the most comprehensive frameworks that you can apply. Oh, and by the way, if you're in health services, you also have to comply with the HIPAA self-rules. If you are working in Washington State and touching the HCA, you also have the Office of the CIO. They have their own compliance rules. So as Delta Dental, we work with the Washington State Healthcare Authority, and we have to prove that we are compliant with the OCIO's security framework. Control areas, so this is the NIST 853. Some of these will look very familiar. So when we talk about the various controls and where it applies to SQA, access control, right? Number one, access control. None of you probably have tested a system without also testing how people log in or access the system, right? So there are a good 30 or 40 controls around setting up how access control is secure, and we'll go over one of those. Audit and accountability. Prove it. That's all it is you've said you do this, prove it. And as testers, that's what we do. The system says that it does this, it does X, and then we go and we ask the appropriate questions that prove whether or not the system is actually doing X. Security authorization, configuration management, a very, very big one. I encourage you to look at the patch level on your own desktop and then ask questions about, so if you're still running Windows 2008, what is your server running, right? If your server is running 2008, it is by its very nature an unsecure server. And therefore poses a risk to the company. And these risks are easy to quantify. Media protection. This is a great one. How many of you do physical testing of your systems? When I was doing applications, we had one guy who would write the same bug every time. The install fails when I open the CD drive. Yeah, and he'd still write the bug, right? Because in his view, that should be a recoverable error, right? Should prompt you, hey, your CD media is gone, put it back in, right? But what do we have now? We've got USB drives, we've got remote drives. How secure is your data if I can plug in a USB drive, right? A USB drive with an auto run, I have instantly infected your machine with malware, right? Risk assessment, everybody does risk-based testing whether they know it or not, right? Some test cases simply aren't worth running, right? Every test case costs time and effort. And nobody gets all the time they want. Nobody gets all the effort they want. We all do risk-based testing. So risk assessment is the same idea, broadened in scope to not just the functionality you're testing, but to your organization as a whole. And what really risk management and QA should be about isn't just making sure that your piece of functionality is working. It is how well is it working and how is it affecting my greater organization, right? If your piece of software opens up a security hole and invites a data breach, and your company gets fined $50 million, and you have to buy 30,000 different subscriptions to the Equifax security report, because that's one of the things, everybody's got that notification, right? Anybody not get a notification that they've been breached, and hey, we've signed you up for Equifax? No, right? That costs the company money. Every one of those things has to be paid for. So, what I want to encourage everybody to do is think about not the quality of my particular functionality under test, but how is that affecting the risk to the entire organization? We talked about access controls and procedures. This is an example of one of the controls out of the 200 or so in the NIST 800. You have to have a policy that says how you manage your access, right? Because if you don't, you have nothing to fall back on to say that Brian shouldn't have had access to this database. And that is a liability when you get breached, because Brian shoved his thumb drive in, ran a SQL query, extracted 1 million users, and walked out the door. I pick on Brian because I used to work for him.
Oh, yeah.
Brian, how could you?
Now I've upgraded to Linux. So that's great.
To expand on that is the idea of minimum necessary access. How many of you can just log onto your database and have all the data you want? Right? You? Yeah? You?
Previously.
Yeah. Your organizations are probably doing it wrong. I can't say for sure, it really depends. But if you can log on and have access to all of the databases, you're either a DBA, when I kind of expect that to happen, or you have a broad range of responsibilities, right? If you don't meet those two definitions, you probably have too much access.
Correct.
Kind of launching off of minimum access is revoking and understanding who has access to what. If you log on, since you raised your hand, and you run a query and extract a gigabyte of data out of your SQL system, who knows? Right? Isn't that kind of scary? This is breach detection,
And
right?
where do you work?
Yeah.
And what kind of routes do you take?
If you don't know that data is being exfiltrated, right? You can't, you can't stop it for one thing. And two, you can't assess the damage, right? In 3 cases that I'm aware of, it could have been 1 user, it could have been 1 million users. And what does the federal government do? They default to the highest number. They don't say what left the building, they say what could have left the building. So, working on this a little bit, what is SQA's role in this whole thing? Is to understand the landscape, understand your own landscape, understand the security frameworks. I'm purposely being very vague because no organization is going to meet every security control. No organization is going to want to meet every security control, and no organization, quite frankly, has an appetite for meeting that. Every one of these controls costs money to implement, costs money to maintain, costs money to measure. So what is your organization's appetite for risk? If you are not working with a risk management organization within your company, this is a perfect opportunity for you. If you are working with a risk management organization in your company, this is another opportunity to raise your hand, go to your risk management people and say, what can I do? What steps should I be taking before we get an audit finding and we have to report to our largest company that, it turns out we've been giving, Joe in the mailroom access to all of our secure data. Right? What are your current processes? Right? What are your organizational processes around securing your data? If anybody can get access to a database just by asking for it, you don't have an access control policy, right? In my organization, you request access, then it goes to your manager, and then it goes to the DBAs, and then it goes back to your manager for an expiration date, right? You need access to this database for how long, right? And that expiration date is set at the time you are given access, right? You say you need 3 days to do whatever you want, you get 3 days. And then you have to redo the whole process to extend that time. On the last point, what does your data look like? If you are not working with PII, personal identifiable information, if you're not working with PHI, personal health information, if you're not working with financial information, at what point is all of this just really academic and so much talk, right? If you are working on, let's say, a program that lets people schedule maintenance on their boat, right? It's a scheduling app. Maybe your data security requirements aren't quite as extensive as, say, the dental insurance companies. Right? So that goes back to understanding your landscape. Right? How much security do you need? How much security are you obligated to do? And that goes to HIPAA and some of the other frameworks, governmental frameworks. And if you happen to have customers, say an unnamed airplane manufacturer somewhere in the Northwest, they may or may not ask you to audit yourself on one of these frameworks, and then require you to contractually meet your various deficiencies. When we're talking about controls are requirements. We all work with requirements. We know what requirements are. When we audit requirements, we're just running tests. That's all it is. It's easy. Everybody in this room does it. Let's say, data has to be segregated. You can't have names and addresses in the same database. What do? You go up to your DBA and you say, print me a screenshot of these two databases, right? Prove to me that names and addresses don't reside in the same database. Congratulations, you've just done an audit, right? When you want to build a program, when you want to go into your audit or your risk management program, do you need it? Not everybody does. Everybody needs a little bit because everybody works with at least intellectual property. But if somebody goes and steals your code for a boat maintenance program, the government doesn't care. Somebody goes in and steals a database containing real information, then the government cares, right? Get buy-in. I can't stress how important this is. when you talk to anybody in your organization, your very first stop should be the CIO. If you have a security person, then understand what they're doing and just say, hey, this is what I want to do. Nothing will get you shut down more than going rogue. It will go fast because you are touching sensitive stuff. Small bites. This is really easy. Don't shoot for the moon. You will fall every time when you say, hey, I want to implement NIST 800. Here's 200 and some odd controls that we got to meet in the next 90 days. They're going to look at you, they're going to laugh, and then they're going to ask you to get back to your desk and do your job, right? So what can you do? What things are easy to roll into what you're already doing? Start small, build on that. Some of the easy things are, where does your data live? Where does it move around to? If you're talking to an outside party, how, right? Oh, we just drop it to an FTP location and we stop worrying about it. That's a bad idea, right? Somebody needs to know about that. At the very least, you should be using SFTP, right? Are your services secure, right? Do you have multiple vendors using the same password to access your services? That's probably not a good idea, right? So ask these questions. I mean, if you're doing service tests, try different passwords. How many passwords are available, right? So build on what you have and always, 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 always ask questions. How are we doing this? I have never met a network engineer that wasn't just more than happy to talk about his architecture, for good or bad, right? If you go to your network engineers and say, hey, where does this database live? What subnets are you on? Can this subnet talk to this subnet? What's our perimeter look like, right? They will talk to you until you chew your arm off. So ask questions, understand your landscape, look at what you have, look at what you can do. Read a couple of the frameworks. They're all free, they're all on the web. Read a framework, take a highlighter and say, hey, I can ask this question, I can fold this question into my daily job. And when it comes time to do an audit, you can say, look, this is what we're already doing. You can already answer all of these questions. And that's adding value to not only your risk management program, but to your organization. Because audits only happen once a year, once every other year. And typically you fail an audit and everybody's surprised, right? Whoa, how did that happen? Well, it's because nobody was asking the questions before the audit, right? Develop a process, but follow it, right? A process that exists just for being a process isn't good for anybody, right? And when you're developing a process by which you try to follow these things, remember that exceptions are the rule, right? You can say, oh, normally we have this nice clean process, but every once in a while we have to fast track it. Guess what? That fast track becomes the norm because it's easier, it's faster. That's why they call it a fast track, right? So build your processes around the exceptions and don't think that everybody's going to follow the process. If there's an easier, faster way to do it, and they don't have to ask permission and all this fun stuff. Last one is very, very important. Nobody cares what you say you do, right? How many of you, if somebody came up to you and said, hey, I ran 100 tests, how many of you could prove it? You have 100 results.
Who cares if you ran 100 tests?
Well,
What's 100 tests if you don't have anything?
Well, so that's the question. How are you?
What does that mean?
Well, by way of example, I ran 100 tests on this system, and here's my results, right? Can you back it up? Do you have 100 pass, 100 fails? Do you have 100 no results, right? I can tell you that the Department of Defense will ask you in detail the results of every test you ran,
You should.
right?
Yep.
And that's the same thing with security policies, right? You can have all the policies in the world. Unless you can prove that you are compliant with that policy, unless you can prove that you do what you say you do, nobody cares, right? If I can't prove to you that I followed this policy, I failed that audit. And you could be following it every day. If there's not a record of it, if there's not evidence of it, then nobody cares. And it's just the way it is. May not be fair, but large unnamed defense contractors in Everett, they don't care. Some resources for you: the National Institutes of Standards and Technologies, that's where you get your NIST report. The Center for Internet Security, that's the CIS Top 20, that's what I recommend everybody do first. It's 20 categories, total of maybe 10 individual controls per category. They're short, they're succinct, they're easy to read, and they're easy checkboxes to check. We do this, we don't do that. We do this, we don't do that. And then everybody's familiar with ISO at some point in time. The ISO 27002, 2013 is the most current framework. I talk really, really fast. You can go there, and all of the stuff is free. The Center for Internet Security is a good one. They have all sorts of resources, spreadsheets and whatnot for you to download and look at. It's great stuff. Next, who's questions?
I got a question.
Yeah.
Hey, great job, Roy, by the way. Really, really nice preface. Let me pile on to what Roy just said. One gap area I'd encourage you guys to look at is system logins, so like system accounts, non-person accounts. Probably one of the biggest gaps in audit findings is when that is an uncontrolled resource. For instance, from a person perspective, you put a finding saying, okay, if they pull this much data, but the control doesn't apply to the service account because it's automated, it's non-person based, and they're doing what it's supposed to do. If that system account pulls back X amount of data or touches the database it's not supposed to, that is now subject to most controls as a failure. So that didn't used to be that way, so keep that in mind when you guys are assessing your systems and architecture, that can be flagged like, what? We didn't have to measure that before. Thought I'd mention that.
Yeah, and to kind of piggyback off Brian, it's an excellent point. Nobody rotates system accounts. Nobody. Everybody should. Everybody should have a program by which a system account gets rotated. We've got this system account that touches this database. Every 6 months it gets a new password. Gets rotated, right? Nobody does that. Everybody should. Administrator accounts. Oh, I love administrator accounts. You know what everybody does? Every administrator I know, they have their login for the regular account, and then they have their special admin account. Guess what? The login is exactly the same, right? If I break the hash on my regular account that I use every single day, I've now got system access at the back end level, right? So what are your account password policies? Everybody says, oh yeah, we have to have strong policies. You know what? Everybody doesn't say you have to have different passwords. You should. Your admin password should be different than your regular password. Yes, sir.
That has been driving me insane for years. Whenever I bring up entropy in passwords, people are like, we don't worry about that. We include numbers. So I'm like, no.
No. Hey, Roy, quick question.
Sure.
Can you give an example of, everyone knows that you're testing and or auditing security. Give an example of a gray area where you call out, this needs to be corrected, and yet the business has a hard time accepting the fact that it's a risk or it's a low priority. Can you give examples of that kind of tension where the people asking the questions are passionate about this is their?
We have a financially dependent system with a process that exists solely on somebody's desktop. They take a file, they process the file, and they upload the file. And it exists solely on their desktop with no check, with no record or whatnot. It's a process that happens every day, and somebody will notice if it doesn't happen, but it exists on a desktop, right? That's probably not a good idea.
Yeah, but that didn't answer his question. His question was, what do you do when you...
What do I do?
How do you solve that?
I bring it up every 6 months.
Are you the one that writes the book?
This process is still running on Shree's desktop. This process is still running on Shree's desktop. Hey, you know this process? It's still running on Shree's desktop.
I think 6 months is too infrequent.
Yeah. So there's that.
Right.
Another one is test data. Ooh, I love test data, right?
TDM.
Yeah, so we have a couple million individual users across a few thousand different groups. Each one of these groups has a unique configuration of benefits, right? Production data is data rich, right? It is fantastic. I want nobody to touch it. Not a tester, not a developer, nobody. And we can't get away from using production data in at least one system, one pre-production system, because it is data rich. It provides so much opportunity to find these unique defects. I was talking to somebody about automating and the value of automation. When you automate, you'll never get the really good stuff. Because when you run regression, you'll never get the really good stuff, right? The really, really good stuff comes from a tester looking at something and going, huh? Mm-hmm. Right? So that's kind of the bad thing about having production data in a pre-production system is it's just so damn useful. There are ways to get around that. I put in a proposal. Nobody wanted to pay me $500,000 to implement it. So there you go. We do have things by which you can do. The vast majority of our production systems use obfuscated data, which means we've taken a real database, we've killed everything older than 3 years, and then we've changed all the names, all the birthdays, and all the addresses to scrambled data, right? So it's no longer PII because it doesn't match a real person. It's no longer PHI, even though we don't touch the health information. All the claims information is the same, but since it doesn't map to a real person, it's not PHI. So, and again, if I keep bringing it up, the way we test our big system is with this production data. It's risky because, it's production data. Even if it doesn't have, even if it is a segregated network node, it's still a lot of data, and all of our testers are required to have back-end SQL access, and all it does is take one bad actor to cause a breach, right? So if I had my way, I'd spend $500,000, I'd get a test system that didn't need production data, but again, cost, benefit, risk analysis.
Can't you generate your own data from the staging environment?
You can. The problem is the richness of the data suffers. So when I talk about data richness, specifically in production data.
You're talking about historical data.
Historical data,
right?
Yeah. Historical data, it's a rich data set, and it provides unique data configurations that you can't generate. They just have to, because, for Boeing, for instance. I've got a guy at Boeing who has switched jobs. He went to California. He came back. Now he's an engineer. Now he's engineering management. Same guy, worked for Boeing for 10 years. He's been in 5 different groups. He's had children. He's had a divorce. One child is out of the house. That's a data-rich data set. And when I have to calculate, is this covered, right? I need that historical, I need that rich historical data set. And theoretically, I could build that one instance. There's always another instance of data, rich data set that you can't build, right? You don't know what you don't know. If I had data configurations, a big book, Roy's big book of data configurations, I'd just be typing in data, right? But it's always that data scenario that you don't think about that catches you. Yeah.
Right, I'll give you a great example. I mean, this is Seattle Children's we're talking about, where one of our systems is capital as it stores the data, yet the corresponding systems are case sensitive. And so just simply a manual error going, oops, forgot an apostrophe, or changing a lowercase d on O'Donnell to uppercase D to correct it in the system can have an incremental effect on what changes are detected. So that's really hard to replicate on big data. And yet it was critical to the systems and the process flow that we're looking at.
Is this technique of format preserving obfuscation, is that something that you practiced, that refers to, where you attempt to capture all the entropy that's in the PII, but in cases and spaces and characters and things, and yet still completely obfuscate?
So what we do is we don't scramble everything per se. It's rules based. Like, so Dave becomes John, Smith becomes Frank. We have access to a geolocation database. So everybody gets a different address in the same city that they were in, right? There are rules to obfuscation on zip codes. If the zip code has less than 2,000 people, you can't preserve the zip code, right? So you have to do something weird with zip codes. For date of births, if you're under 90 years old, we get to mask the month and the day. If you're over 90 years old, we also have to mask the year, right? So things like that, and data obfuscation is actually, there's a government guidelines to data obfuscation. So
Are there libraries that
Did you?
provide that, or?
Yeah, I was gonna say,
write
did you
your own?
build that yourself, or did you
no,
buy
we
it?
bought it. We bought it off the shelf. There's a couple of systems that will do it. So we engaged one vendor, and they came in and helped us build that system. What we do is we take a production database, we scrape off everything but the most recent 3 years, and then we run it through there, and we have an obfuscated database that we can then propagate downstream.
This sounds very simple for like some data, like username and date and address. But if I have a very complex system and it has a lot of data about different companies, the addresses of these companies, revenue of like transactions and such kind of information, will also this system that you use also be able to change that somehow, if it's like a lot of checkboxes and drop downs?
Yeah, so during implementation, these systems can be customized to mask or obfuscate whatever data you want to do. The first thing that happens is they have a tool that scrubs your database and flags data that looks like an address, looks like a date of birth, looks like a first name, last name, etc. And then you get to do the checkbox exercise. You say yes, 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 no, yes, yes, yes.
Okay, that's interesting. Can you tell the secret what's the name of this tool?
Everybody's heard of Informatica, right? Informatica.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have a monolithic database, or do you have microservice architecture with dozens of individual databases? Because that's where our company.
I am sad to say that our database is monolithic. when I said a $500,000 to implement the testing I went, it's another $1.5 million to break apart the database into components like I want to do. Yeah, sir.
So, you have this expiration model for kind of database access.
Mhm.
What do you do for someone who's like in business intelligence and the CEO wants like a weekly report on how their subscriber numbers are?
Data mart.
What?
Data mart.
Data mart. Okay.
Yeah, so it's a hands-off process. All the data gets munged, gets
Uh-huh.
de-identified, and reported out of the mart, not directly off of production.
Okay.
Data warehouse.
Sir?
So, you talked about, I'm going all the way back to the
Yeah, yeah.
start of the presentation. You talked about that you're a risk-driven testing
Mhm.
guru. Can you tell me its applications and how do you design tests around that?
What was the first part of that?
Risk-driven testing.
Risk-driven testing, you
It's
said.
a buzzword for me, like.
Yeah. So we work with a couple of application suites. We have an externally facing application suite and an internally facing application suite. Every one of the applications within each one of those suites has kind of a risk rating, right? And it's how tolerant are we of failure, right?
So
If we have a zero tolerance on failure for this particular system, we apply a lot of test resources to it. If we have a high tolerance for failure on another system, we have a lower level of testing applied to it. And what that means is some of it is just unit tests and UAT. Some of it is a full suite of testers getting in there and munging data and doing the whole thing.
So your risk factors, you define that internally? And-
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Nobody I know is willing to provide that for you. It would be somewhat it would be a difficult talk for somebody else to come in and say, hey, I think this is a risky system, and I think this is a system that'll allow failure. That really can only be driven internally, based on factors that you know about. For instance, we have a system that I have typically said is fragile, right? It's not a particularly revenue-generating system. It's not revenue-dependent, but it's incredibly fragile. And so that's internal knowledge that I can apply to my risk rating for that system, right? So I can say, it's not the most important system, but it's really fragile. So I'm going to add a couple more hours to my estimates on that.
So it's basically resource allocation.
It's resource allocation. I think the hardest part for testers is stopping themselves from testing, right? Right. So test manager, I want to find all the bugs, as many bugs as I can, but I also have a budget that I have to work with, and there's 3 more projects waiting for testers, right? So I have to apply a risk model to every piece of testing that I do, and whether you know it or not, everybody does it.
Thanks.
Are you agile?
Agile. We're waterfall agile. I have a joke. Agile is just a waterfall in really small chunks. We have multiple product streams going on at any moment. Some are more agile than others.
Have you found, since you have a security focus and you have kind of a spectral view of waterfall and agile, do you find that agile puts security issues, puts them off and doesn't pay attention to them, or do you have any thoughts on like how do you keep an agile team?
So, from a risk perspective, we have security architects, right? And if there's a new system going in, the security architects have their fingers in that pie, right? So it's specifically with our company, with the increase in breaches focused on health companies, you don't get a seat at the table without having some sort of security implementation.
So build it securely. is
Yeah.
the answer.
Nothing else? Oh, I've got 5 minutes.